Namaskar. Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Aryayana. Today I have a new guest, Krishna Yunjan, and also a returning guest, Utsav Chakravarti. Let's welcome both of them. Namaskar Krishna, Namaskar Utsav.
Namaste.
Namaste, happy to be back.
Thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us, Krishna. And viewers, Krishna is a Persian expert. He knows Iran like the back of his hand. Iran, according to some of the texts and research that I have done, used to be called Aryayana. And then also when Iran refers to itself in Sanskrit, they call it Iranam. That is today's words. But this goes back a long way. Everybody knows that Iran used to be Persia, that it has had a long history, a long culture. But how much do we know about Iran prior to it becoming Islamic? And that's one of the things that Krishna has done extensive research on. He is a Sanskrit scholar. He's also an Iranian scholar. And I just wanted to first, introduce you to our audience. Krishna, welcome to PGurus channel for the first time. What a pleasure and honor to have you on our channel.
Thank you very much. The honor is mine.
Krishna, take us back to, how did this interest happen to you? After all, we both come from the same city, Hyderabad. Yay. And how did this interest to know about Iranian civilization, Aryayana, Zoroastrianism, Zarathustra, and now we can go even further back because Kaikeyi is supposed to have come from this area at the time of Ramayana. So over to you. Take us back down memory lane and tell us, how did you come to get connected with this?
Yeah, just through family. My mother's side of the family is Zoroastrian, or known as Parsis in India, mainly clustered around Bombay, Gujarat, Navsari in Gujarat. But my Masi, my mother's oldest sister, she moved to Iran during the Shah's time and stayed there even after the revolution, and she lived there till she passed away just very recently, a few years back. But that didn't make so much of an impact on me as when in my late 20s I got involved with an Iranian lady, and I visited Iran. And it was a beautiful experience. It was also in my 20s, 30s that I went through kind of a spiritual phase as a seeker, looking at different religions. And so, of course, Islam was one of them. It's one of the world's great religions. And within Islam, you have Islamic Sufism, and it really, Persia is Sufi central. And so I served at a Persian khanqa, or a Sufi house of worship. And so I got to know their traditions from within there as well. And then even within Hinduism, as I looked at it from a historical perspective, we often talk about the Arya linkages, which Western Indologists have certain theories about that. So following those theories also kind of brings you into the Iranian space. So that's basically been the way I encountered Iran in my life.
Thank you so much. So let's get back, in history. According to you, when did civilization evolve in what is modern day Iran?
Civilization in modern Iran goes back very, very to not just pre-Islamic times, but even pre-Zoroastrian, the race that today comprises what we call the Persians. Even before they moved into the area, there were the Elamites, Elam, as they say. In fact, just yesterday, Elam was in the news because the police started taking the side of the protesters. That's how Elam was in the news just yesterday or the day before. So that's where it started. And it was basically an extension of Mesopotamian civilization. Elam had a sort of a slightly adversarial relationship with Mesopotamia. And so that's where it really all begins. And really, if we want to understand our relationship, in the sense, India's relationship with Iran, you have to go back to ancient Mesopotamia, much before Zoroastrianism, much before anything else, because Hinduism did have a very close link with Mesopotamian religions. We had the Mitannis in West Asia who were worshipping Vedic gods. They were absolutely Bronze Age Hindus, And the reason I say this is it's all too common for Indian analysts to think about Iran only from the perspective of Zoroastrianism and this false dichotomy of Indo-European versus Semitic, as if they're two totally different things. They're, average Indian starts talking about Indo-European before he even looks around and talks about Indo-West Asian, Indo-Jewish, Indo-Mesopotamian, Indo-East Asian. You'll meet common man in all of these countries in Asia who know from their cultural memory that they have something in common with the Indians, maybe even a brotherly feeling. I've never met a European who feels that way, but for some reason, Indian analysts are always jumping to Indo-European before they're really looking at our very close and deep relationship with all these other cultures that are much closer to us.
Thank you so much. In fact, I was having a conversation with Dr. Nagaswamy, who's a scholar in Sanskrit, English, and Tamil. It's a rare combination where you can read all these things. And he was a Brahmi scholar. Believe it or not, he could read Brahmi like we would read English. And it used to blow my mind how he used to be able to read Brahmi script. And he was the one who told me that Emperor Ashoka standardized a lot of things. For example, scripts of writing. He said that anything that you wrote from left to right is what is Brahmi, and whatever you wrote from right to left was defined as Karoshti or Karoshti, something like that. It could be Kha or it could be Ka. It doesn't matter. And from there you have Judaism writing the same way. Arabic is written that way. Persian is written that way, or Farsi, I should say. So we had these interactions going for a long time. In fact, he also talks about an accord that was done across the Tigris-Euphrates River and Mittite, two different tribes. They swear by Mitra, which is sun, and Indra, god of king of gods, that they shall no longer fight or something like that. And this is written in Brahmi script. Yep. And we also have Bactrian Empire, where the coins had on one side Greek alphabets, on the other side they had Brahmi.
Yeah.
So I wanted to add something here. Since you brought up Mitanni, there is a very famous, one of the earliest Sanskrit script, edicts that is found in the world today is not from India. It is from Syria by the Mitanni kings. And it was a treaty between the Mitanni king and the king of Egypt, Amenhotep III. So this is about one generation after what Judaism claims is Abraham. This treaty is being signed, and it is written in Sanskrit, and it evokes all the Vedic Hindu deities in that thing. And the name of the king, the Mitanni king, is Dasharath, or he writes it as Tusharath in his pronunciation. Yes. So but I will back to Krishna, and he has the full background on that story and everything else.
Krishna, talk to us a little bit about this. These are all things that I pick up by talking to various guests that come on my program. Talk to us a little bit the relevance of all this stuff to modern day Iran, because modern day Iran is 90%, 80% Shia or something of that nature. There are a few Baha'is. I don't know if they are still in Iran or they don't profess their faith. I don't know how many are professing Zoroastrianism today. I mean, there is a whole lot of things that we don't know about Iran. So talk to us a little bit about the cultural fabric of Iran as it existed then and now. You can bring us back to the modern day. Over to you.
Okay, well, in terms of how it's relevant to modern Iran, especially from an American Western perspective, but I'll also speak about it from an Indian perspective, is that, look, right now, over the last few years, Iran has pretty much lost Gaza. It's kind of lost Syria, even Venezuela. If you look at it, Iran had some kind of a thing going with Venezuela. That's gone. Iran is gradually being pushed out of its westward thrust. And ever since the Khomeiniist revolution, they are ideologically primed to look west and to project power westward. I once spoke to an Iranian regime-affiliated journalist who was living in Europe. This was way back during the Mojasabs, the so-called green wave under Ahmadinejad. And I said, what happens if Iran sort of basically gets beaten in the West? He said, then we're going to look east. And that is what's going to happen. If one thing that Iran can do is tell America, tell Israel that, okay, we won't mess around anymore to the west of Iran. But then they will start looking east. Now, if Iran looks east, there's basically three possibilities. One is the revival of Iran Shahr. The Shah was trying to do that. Iran Shahr is basically, just like we talk about Bharat Varsh as being not just the state of India, but also Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, maybe more. Similarly, Iran Shahr is the Iranian Persianate cultural space, which is not just Persians, but includes Persianized Turks, includes Kurds, it includes Pashtuns, Tajiks, it includes the Ossetians who are Christian in the Caucasus. But with the way that Iran is positioned right now as a radical Shiite state, Iran cannot even control its own Baluch in Sistan, Baluchistan, simply because they are Sunni. Iran mandates that if a Baluch builds a mosque in Tehran, the imam of the mosque has to be a Shiite imam, and that's not going to be accepted. So because they've painted themselves into a corner, therefore if they look east, that's going to change. So how could that change? One is it really loosens up its Shiite theology. Now, there has been a project going back at least 100 years since the decline of the Ottomans, where some very great Ottoman scholars like Sayyid Nursi, and there have been many great Iranian scholars, Ahmad Kasravi and so forth, who wanted to do away with what they call Sufigari and Shi'igari, which means this whole Sufigari, like we would say in Hindi, this Sufism nonsense and the Shiite clerical nonsense, and just make it a very democratized sort of Protestant kind of Islam, which is basically identical for all practical purposes to Sunni Islam. Now, if that happens, you're looking at a Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey axis in the making. Okay, is that going to be good for the West? I don't think so. Is it going to be good for India? I don't think so. Okay, the third possibility, and this is something that you hear a lot of Westerners and even Indians talk about, is to promote these other religions in Iran. One is the new religions like Baha'i. So you have a Baha'i temple in Delhi. You have some in America, very beautiful ones. I had the pleasure of being part of a congregation in Seattle. A lot of Iranian asylum seekers, at least they claim to be Baha'i. So that's one of the things that's being promoted. The other thing that's being promoted, of course, is a Christian underground in Iran, very vigorously promoted promoted by the West, by America especially. But the third and very prominently advertised is a back to the roots movement. And here the roots are defined as Zoroastrianism. Okay. Now, the way the West has played the game, both amongst the Persian diaspora, the Kurdish diaspora, including in Scandinavia, and also in Afghanistan, most significantly, is to market Zoroastrianism as a back to the roots movement based on some kind of notional racial identity. And it's generally piloted by people who are at best described as intellectuals. It is not really a charged, electric, spiritual movement. It's not a movement that spiritual seekers are attracted to, for the most part, in both these countries. And in many countries, like for instance in Afghanistan, it's seen for what it is. It's seen as a Western liberal. It's basically Western liberalism with the skin of Zoroastrianism. Also, if you dig a little deeper, it acts as a bridge between Islam and Christianity. So you first become a liberal, Westernized Zoroastrian who identifies with some kind of white adjacent racial identity, some notional monotheistic kind of idea, very general. And then from there, Zoroastrianism is linked to Mithraism. And from Mithraism, it's linked to Jesus, because the story of Jesus very much parallels Mithra and so forth. And so then it becomes Christianized, Christianity. So ultimately, that's the end goal as far as certain Western movements in the Zoroastrian space are concerned. The Zoroastrianism becomes a gateway to Christianization of certain populations. I also see this extremely rosy idea amongst Indians who think that, any Indian who's met Parsis in India, they're an educated, very mainstream community. They're great people, talented, and they have a very harmonious relationship with Hindus and your average Parsi. They think that, wow, if the whole of Iran becomes Zoroastrian, they're going to be our best friends. But that's not how it's going to happen. You see, Zoroastrianism in a Hindu solvent is going to be very different from Zoroastrianism outside. Now, I'm in touch, for instance, with the Zoroastrian underground in Iran. People who take to, okay, I'm Zoroastrian now. Some of them are in the arts community, and one of them was writing a novel which he wanted me to review, and being not Hindu or being anti-Hindu, anti-Deva is a cornerstone of how they look at things. Now, how does that happen? How could that happen? We have to look at the history of Zoroastrianism, that Zoroastrianism was not like a brotherly kind of religion. Zoroastrianism was kind of like a counter-religion that started much after Vedic civilization began, much after it was even at its peak, probably at the time of its decline. Zoroastrianism splintered off as a counter-Vedic kind of religion. You can think of it as an ancient ancestor of Khalistanism, just like Sikh, he started off as basically what is a dharmic panth, a Hindu panth, and then it became a separate identity under British tutelage, and today it's quite something else. That's kind of how it started. Like if you look at and what was it really? What was its substance really? The substance of Zoroastrianism was just a kind of a placeholder, a kind of a makeshift skin that could bring pretty disparate interests together under a certain cultural identity. For instance, if you look at Cyrus, the most celebrated Zoroastrian emperor in the past, Cyrus, in all his public inscriptions, like the Cyrus cylinder, which is so famous, he does not say I am Zoroastrian. He does not say I worship Ahura Mazda. He says I worship Marduk, who is the main god, the main deity of ancient Babylon in Mesopotamia. He says, I am a devotee of Marduk. Marduk has chosen me, and so on and so forth. So that's whom he participated in those festivals in public with great royal pomp and splendor. But some people say in private he was Zoroastrian, and let's accept that for what it is. So why would he do that though? This is basically cobbling together a bunch of different, very disparate priesthoods and the tribes, military priesthoods, together in order to build an empire. That's what was essentially happening. You move on to people like Xerxes, another very great Persian emperor, and also finds mention in the Hebrew scriptures. And he openly boasts of destroying all the temples of the Devas in the Middle East, in West Asia. So apparently we had, and when we talk about Devas, you talked about Mitanis. Mitanis mentioned Indra. That's very significant, because in Zoroastrianism, Indra is reviled. Indra is hated. Now Varuna and all of them, they are applauded, but Indra specifically, who is the most praised deity in the Vedas, is reviled in Zoroastrianism. But the Mitanis worshipped him, and Mitanis are to the west of Iran. That's kind of significant, right? So Xerxes said, I destroyed the temples of all the Devas in my dominions. That goes all the way from basically Pakistan today to the Mediterranean Sea. Div in Farsi even today means like a devil. Get the word devil from that. Div. When they say divane, which in Urdu comes down as divana. Divana means a madcap, a guy who is possessed by divs, or a guy who worships diva. He must be a crackpot, a madcap, or a fool at best, or someone who's possessed by evil spirits. So next time you hear the word divana, understand where that's coming from. That's coming from that Zoroastrian schism that happened with Vedic India. So it was a counter-religion. It influenced Judaism later on. Then Judaism, if you read the early Judaic prophets, Abraham, Isaac, and so forth, you would think you're reading the history of some Hindu tribe. Just like we have Kula Devatas, they had the Kula Devatas with the idols and so forth. All their way of thinking was entirely, they spoke of the gods in the plural, Elohim, plural gods. And then it starts with Moses is where you see the change starting, where it becomes what I call angry schismatic monotheism. So Vedic, if you wanted to talk about Vedic monotheism, it would be integral. But here you had a schismatic monotheism where this is right and that is the devil. Those other gods, they are the devils. So so that was, I think, a heavy influence of Zoroastrianism from Persia. So that's kind of a track record that Zoroastrianism had in the past. And even if you look at the Fravahar, the Zoroastrian symbol, the winged angel with holding the ring, that is simply lifted from the god Ashur of Assyria, the ancient Assyrian god Ashur. That's exactly lifted. It's not a Persian symbol. It wasn't created by Zoroastrians. It was simply lifted. So you have here a religion that was created by taking the symbol of the god of Assyria, Ashur, established this firmly by an emperor who declared himself the devotee of Marduk, completely different religious tradition, borrowing certain spiritual or ritualistic elements from the Hindu Brahmins. So what is it basically? It could be one thing here and one thing there, and you see through history that's exactly what happened. I was once reading a compilation of Zoroastrian, medieval Zoroastrian writings in Sanskrit. Some of them wrote in simple Sanskrit. And over there, they present Zoroastrianism as we're basically the same thing as Hindus. We're the same, we're the same, but these are slight differences, and this is what our panth stands for. Nicely written. Under the British, the Zoroastrians basically, they position themselves as basically being white adjacent and decidedly not Hindu, not Indian. For instance, Yazatas are the Zoroastrian gods, and lots of the Zendavesta is in praise of the different Yazatas. And if you look at the ruins of old temples, you have the carvings of the Yazatas. Clearly, they were worshipped. But if you ask a Zoroastrian today, they'll say, no, we never worshipped the Yazatas. We only worshipped the one Ahura Mazda. This is an oversimplification. It is reductionistic, and it is meant to appear very similar to Christianity or basically the Abrahamic, what we call right now the Abrahamic religions. So, and if you look at the Zoroastrians who are now in Iran, that's pretty much their spiel. Their spiel is that basically, we're also monotheistic. Why be Muslim? We're the same thing. There's no difference, right? So Zoroastrianism as a Parsi community within India is going to be very different from if Zoroastrianism was to appear as a force outside of India. This is something that Indians need to understand. It's not going to be like your friendly Parsi neighbor. Okay, this is a totally different thing. And we've also seen that while your average Parsi is as Desi and Indian as any other, the Zoroastrian elites who were very close to the Anglo establishment, the colonial establishment, they still maintain that close link. They're anything but friendly, especially with Hindutva and the Modi regime. As long as India remains a satellite of the Anglosphere, there will be a good interface. Otherwise, they are going to. I was at the Parliament of Religions in Chicago a couple of years back, and basically the whole thing was like an anti-Modi event and an anti-Hindutva event, and it was pioneered by Fezana, which is the premier elite Zoroastrian body here in North America, and by the Khalistanis. So that's what you're looking at. Those elements do exist, unfortunately, and that's quite embarrassing, not just for me, but even for a lot of other Zoroastrians, Indian Parsis. So we have to understand that this is a very complex thing, and it can change its form depending on what the flavor of the day is. Right? It does not have roots. It's a skin that is over bones of different cultures kind of held together. That's how it began. That's how it always has been. And we have to understand it in that setting. So that's one thing I wanted to. So now, if you're looking at it from a Western perspective, and if Iran goes Zoroastrian with significant Christian and Baha'i and and of course there will be some Muslim sections of society, what will it ultimately lead to? I don't think it will lead to anything. It's going to be as much of a wild vector as, in fact, it will be more of a wild vector than it is today. We don't know what could happen in the future with that because it doesn't have actual roots. And really, as far as Israel is concerned, it would buy it some time. It would buy it some time. That's about the best that can happen. Even if Iran became Christian through Zoroastrianism, it would only buy Israel and the West a certain amount of time, maybe a few decades at most. Eventually, after turning east, Iran will turn back west. Okay. Now, there's a very interesting puzzle, that Ferdowsi, the great Persian author of the Shahnameh, which is like their Mahabharata, say like their national epic. And he says that, they have this, of course, I think he's getting this partly from Islam itself, but the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, they have this idea of Ham, Shem, and Japheth, right? And when it comes to Shem, which is the son of Noah, through whom those races were created, who are most spiritually inclined. They say that the realm of Shem, really, from which we get Semitic, is basically from India on one side through to the Mediterranean on the other side, that band of countries. And he says that, but right now this is all, we're fighting one another. The Persian, the Arab, and the Hindu are at odds with one another. This is a puzzle, and we're broken right now, and we need to put that all together. And of course, at that time, the thinking was maybe through Islam, we're going to put it all together because India is right now being Islamized, and we're already. And of course, he hated Islam though, but he was thinking of a way to do this. Others were thinking Islam would probably be the way to do it, but he was thinking of other ways. So this is a very interesting churn that needs to happen, because only if we have some Iran as a stable entity, stable in time, which is, from a religion that's based in lived experience rather than just an intellectual identity formation. And it has to be linked with one's ancestors. There has to be an ancestral link with it. Only then we can really feel that they will settle down and stop going after either West or East. And I don't think that Zoroastrian is going to be that answer, unlike a lot of Indians who think that way, or Westerners. I think the way to do it is to put them in touch with their Vedic roots. And that means that Zoroastrianism is included in that. Today, we can certainly talk about Zoroastrianism as one amongst the dharmic spectrum of religions. Zoroastrianism deserves to be celebrated and to continue to prosper. That can happen best when it is part of that Hindu Vedic spectrum of religions rather than as a counter religion, which is bound to happen if it is taken separately out of the Hindu context. So in short, that's what I would say.
Thank you so much. And a lot of stuff that there to absorb, a lot of stuff you have packed in. Utsav, sorry I kept you waiting for this long. See, people in the Beltway, they tend to oversimplify stuff. In fact, many may not even know that the equivalent of, I could be oversimplifying here. Krishna, excuse me if I'm oversimplifying here. The equivalent of Pope for Shia is the current, what is his name? Khamenei is the religious head of the Shia religion. So when people are talking about, okay, we will do off with his head, somebody warned them and said, look, don't touch the supreme leader, because there suddenly you're going to be touching the religion also. So there is, if you look at Iran, it's not simple. There are lots of layers like an onion. And we know that it got Islamized some hundreds of years ago. But underneath, the Zoroastrianism has always stayed there. I mean, I know this because I've many friends in Hyderabad. See, they came in waves. Every time there was a purge in Iran, a few families would come and settle down in Hyderabad. In fact, there's a restaurant genre called Iranian restaurant in Hyderabad. I don't know how much it is there prevalent now, but when I was growing up, I mean, the best tea, if you wanted, you got it there. And there was this thing called 1 by 2. You pay for 1 cup, but you get 2 cups. Over to you. So you have your work cut out. When people say, oh, Iran, it's an Islamic country, not quite. So how would you explain the Iran civilization from a cultural perspective, when America is now thinking, okay, there's going to be a prince, and then they are going to go back to how things were in like maybe the 50s until like 79. It's not quite so simple, isn't it? You're muted, Utsav.
That is true. So, firstly, I would like to thank Krishna for the very detailed analysis of some of the minor details that nobody pays attention to. I'm sure nobody in Washington, D.C. has ever ventured into understanding the history of Iran from that perspective. Because, and today I was speaking to some friends at the Hill, some staffers, and they are obsessed with Iran right now. So, I was there to speak about Bangladesh, and all I got back was comparisons with Iran in many ways. And, we were having an honest conversation on some of these things. And that kind of triggered the thought in me, why it is important for us to have this conversation that we are having right now. It is important to have this conversation because from the Western perspective, which is very interventional in Iran at this point, it has been for the last many years. And, as we follow the news, tomorrow, day after tomorrow, a week from now, things are going to happen in Iran. And what I fear the most is that we are going to, do a series of events or trigger a series of events that 20 years from now, we may be regretting. And that is where Krishna's analysis and Krishna's understanding of the history of Iran and the people around that region is so crucial. Because, if I were to give a message to the thought leaders in Washington, D.C., to somebody in the National Security Council at the White House, to Marco Rubio, my message would be that listen to what Krishna is saying. Because an Iran that finds revival in Baha'i or finds revival in the westernized monotheistic proto-Christian new version of Zoroastrianism will all descend down the same path that the current Iranian Khamenei regime has descended down on. What really can make Iran depart from its civilizational posture that it has had over the last hundreds of years, I would say. The Shah rule was probably a blimp in many ways. Is the real need for Vedicization of Iran. And when I say the Vedicization, I really like the last part of Krishna's analysis where he says that the Vedicization or the Vedic return to the Vedas of Iran will essentially unite in many ways Firdausi's dream of bringing the people of the subcontinent and the people of the all the way up to the Mediterranean Sea together in a manner that is non-threatening, in a manner that is civilizationally rich, in a manner because of its polytheistic nature that will be accepting of diversity. And that will create a far better solution because, you will not find expansionist ideas coming out of those civilizational moves. And that is something that is very important. In fact, I would even suggest, Jewish analysts, folks sitting in Israel who are losing their sleep over what Iran is going to do next, should really consider this as part of their thought leadership's movement. And that is why, this conversation is so important. From where I am looking at it, this is not just what happened 3,000 years ago. This is not just whether Indra or Vayu or Varuna were revered or whether, Brahmi script is the best or Sanskrit or Farsi. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the future of the region and by extension, the West, because we now know more than ever before that, nobody is going anywhere. Everything comes back to haunt if you make the wrong moves.
Thank you so much. And I have very fond memories of, things Parsi. For example, in one of my trips to India, I stayed at a Parsi guest house in New Delhi, Anjuman something. I had a Parsi friend, and he set me up. He's a life member, and he set me up, and I found a room there. I was staying there for a few days. And I would sit down for breakfast. And in breakfast, I met one gentleman. He was in the C-suite in Mumbai for many decades. And while we were talking, who am I, who is this? And he suddenly dropped something that completely bowled me over. He said, Oh, by the way, I'm also a Zoroastrian priest. And the reason I'm here for 2 weeks, is for 1 week, I'm going to give a break for the normal priest. Because inside this guest house, there is a temple and the fire is burning. And he said, I have come here to give that man a break for a week so that he can go and take a break from this thing. He's doing this 24/7. And then he told about how, he was in corporate, just like, we both were in corporate at that point of time. And he said, but he never lost touch with his roots. He went and learned the rites, what needs to be performed. And for 2 weeks in a year, because he said he doesn't just do it in Delhi, but there are also other places. So a very small microcosmic community of Parsis are still keeping their religion alive. I mean, that said, wow. I mean, this man is quite well off. He's done extremely well in corporate sector, but he never wanted to give up that. So see, this kind of passion for who you are and what your identity is. I mean, I hope something like this rubs off on people in Iran also. So first of all, we have to get some clutter out of their heads. Let's say that the clamp of religion that is currently on Iran gets taken out one way or the other, 3 months, 6 months down the road. How do you foresee the thing play out? Next 5 years, maybe? Just give us in about 5-10 minutes how you see a progression of what Iran would be.
Is that for itself or for me?
No, it's for you.
Krishna.
I'll come back to Utsav in just a moment. Krishna, it's for you.
Yeah, I wanted to address just a couple of things first, which tie into this. Both in terms of the internal dynamics of what's happening among Parsis today, and also in terms of as a carrier of the actual culture. So Parsis in India, absolutely fantastic people, but so many Parsis for so long, the last few decades, they have been so frustrated with the Parsi leadership, the Parsi Panchayat in India, and also even among the diaspora. I'll give you an example. After the breakup of the fall of the Soviet Union, this exact same conversation was being had about Tajikistan. They said, Tajikistan is going to go Zoroastrian. The exact same. And if anything, Tajikistan was much more ripe for the picking than Iran will be if this regime falls. Because for the last, we've had now 2-3 generations of people born under an Islamic regime who have been so thoroughly brainwashed that even if they are uber liberal by Iranian standards, they have some very strong ways of looking at the world that they're not even aware of. Tajikistan, on the other hand, was under Soviet rule. It was kind of like a tabula rasa. And you could have, if Zoroastrianism had a chance, that would have been it. And in fact, the Indian government recognized that. The Indian government rushed and said, we are actually getting phone calls for visas to come to India because some of them want to learn Zoroastrianism and take it back with them to Tajikistan. So we are going to be giving special visas just for that. You Zoroastrians, Indian Parsis, get your act together and let's do it. In fact, there was an initiative by a Zoroastrian lady who set up an institute precisely for that purpose. She was met with a group of obstreperous Zoroastrian elites who came there from the Parsi Panchayat. They physically manhandled her, shut the gates, and shut the whole operation down. This, you have to understand, their entire sense of identity as it exists today was put in place under British colonial race theory, right? They not only they don't consider Tajiks as their brothers. They think that they're like mixed race with Mongols and Turks and whatnot. Even Iranians, they don't. So even the Iranians who came over, the Irani cafes are basically Zoroastrians who came over the last 200 years versus Parsis being much older immigrants. Even there, they split for a while, that we can't accept these because maybe they're muddled, they're mudbloods, So this is British race theory at its best, at its most comical. And it's tragic, but it's also comical, and it causes so much frustration amongst right-thinking Zoroastrians. But they have the elite that acts as a subaltern for the West, and this is specifically, I'm talking to Westerners out here, is that, if you think that those Zoroastrians who are willing to turn around and fire at Modi or Hindutva in India, or those Khalistanis who do that, are your men, you're mistaken, because this is going to lead to a lot of problems down the line. They expect to be rewarded for what they have. There's going to be frustration within their communities. You're going to end up with a lot more problems. And I think certain countries like Canada are beginning to realize that with their incubation of Khalistanism. But this is what's going to happen. It's not going to work out very well. So if Iran, if the lid blows open in Iran, there's a couple of things that need to be considered. Iran is not going to just fall like a house of cards. You have to understand that the state in Islamic ideology or Shiite ideology is just a vehicle. What they've put together is a society at the very street level. It goes from there, and that is going to still remain, even if they're not acting openly. It's going to be there. It's going to be a much more difficult nut to crack than even Iraq was. So it's not going to be like, oh, fantastic, the Ayatollah is dead, and therefore now all Iranians are free. That's not how it's going to work out. Okay, there's going to be either there's going to be massive violence within Iran itself, or it's going to unite the society in a different way against the West. And like I said, that opens Iran up for this homogenization of Islam from Pakistan all the way to the Mediterranean. Right? That's what's going to, I think that will ultimately win out, just like it has won out in many other countries in the Middle East that the US has toppled. A similar thing will happen in Iran. And that is going to be disastrous for Israel. That's a death knell. It's going to be disastrous for the West, and it's going to be a serious concern for India. On the other hand, if we gradually, like I said, move towards controlled Vedicization, proper mechanisms put in place, you are creating a solvent. You're changing the background of the way the whole thing works, and that can be a much more stable option in the future.
Thank you so much. And Utsav, one question for you. 2003, right? 2003 is when America went into Iraq, isn't it? And they got rid of Saddam Hussein, and then there was this guy called Jerry Paul Bremer, who was going to just essentially construct the new Iraq with the constitution. And it was all basically they were listening to this one guy, Chalabi, if I remember correctly, Ahmad Chalabi, Iraqi National Congress. And then it took a long time before they realized that this guy was full of it. But be that as it may, what had happened was in 2003, Indian consulate and Indian government reached out to United States and said, look, in 1920s, it was Indian, rank and file, police, constabulary, and even army that stabilized what is modern day Iraq. And this was under British occupation, but there were all these warring groups. You have to look at Lawrence of Arabia to understand how things were. And India said, we'll be happy to give you this information as to what sect does what, how, all these different things, because not much has changed. That was their read at that point of time. But Bremer completely, he didn't even bother to respond to that. He just went ahead and did what he had to do. And one of the biggest mistakes he made was to completely disband the Iraqi army, which was pretty professional, except that he needed to take out the extreme elements like the general level or above. But the whole thing got disbanded, and then those people formed the fabric of ISIS after that. Take a look at Iran today. If something similar happens, we are all saying that Iran has a lot of links back to Vedas, which is basically still alive and active and thriving in India. Do you think this time, for a change, America would listen to India? What are your thoughts? What's up?
So I don't know if America will listen to India. And I genuinely believe the thought and the ideas and the analysis should not come from India. India should focus on its geostrategic objectives and its posture on Iran from its civilizational viewpoint. I think it should come from people like you, me, Krishna, and we are 5 million in America. There is no reason why we, as American Hindus, cannot put forth this concept. Just, I mean, people in the White House listen to what Jewish Americans have to say on many things in this world, because they genuinely believe that the experience and the lived experience of the Jews in Eastern Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, for better or worse, American foreign policy in Eastern Europe has had a lot of inputs from the Jewish community, because much of the Jewish community in America has had a history of living in Eastern Europe. So it is not that it has not been done before. I genuinely believe that our thought leadership in Washington, D.C. should listen to some of these innovative thoughts in terms of how we can civilizationally stabilize Iran. And this is something that I've always said, whether it is Iran or whether it is Malaysia and Indonesia. And in fact, when we did the Ramayana Across Indo-Pacific exhibition at the Capitol Hill, and this year in about 2 weeks we are going to do it at the Maryland State Capitol. This was the idea that I wanted our leadership in America to embrace. That instead of hard power, if you really want to contain Chinese hegemony in Eastern Asia, embrace the Ramayana. It's a civilizational thread that had withstood 3,000 years of changes in that part of the world, including Catholicism and Islam, whether it is in Philippines or Malaysia. So in this particular case, tracking back towards Iran, my suggestion to our leadership is that have a white paper. Somebody like Krishna can really go into details on these things. Have a white paper on what it would look like if Iran, 50 years from now, has a thriving, diverse population where, their ancient Vedic traditions are revived. I would, please, Krishna, go ahead.
No,
please come in.
After you.
So that would be my suggestion. Explore the ideas, and people in Iran, you believe it or not, are open to ideas. And I know for sure, and this is something I heard just today from people who are making decisions in DC. Neither the MEK nor the Shah and his descendants are liked by the Iranians. We have invested, we as in America has invested millions and millions in dollars on both MEK and the Shah, and it's not going to bring us anything. So that's just a pointer to start with. Krishna, you can carry on.
Thank you so much, Krishna.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with more with that. MEK has been, it's just a cult. The Iranians by nature are an intelligent, spiritual, they're also very practical, and they love the good things in life, and they're a very civilized race of people, both in a good sense, and also maybe makes them soft in a certain way. There are other parts of the Iranic world where they tend to be more tribal, more tough, more willing to fight, that kind of thing. I wanted to pick up on that sentence that Utsav said, is that the Iranian people are open to ideas. Now, it's not just non-regime Iranians or anti-regime Iranians who would be open to those ideas. I would like to recall that Ahmadinejad, while he was in power, that means at the height of his political career, he floated the idea of a Maktab Iran. Maktab means a school. That means basically an Iranian school of spirituality. That means instead of defining themselves within the context of Islam, he floated that idea of being just that he said we have always been our own spiritual panth, our own spiritual stream. And this is just a continuation of that. It was a very controversial statement to make. Of course, it was shut down by certain people, certain Ayatollahs in the regime. Of course, it's extremely politically incorrect to say in his position. But I just want to show you that someone that embedded in the regime was willing to think outside the box. If you look at it, if you were to ask me who has preserved ancient pre-Islamic Iranian culture better, has it been the Iranian who calls himself Muslim today, or has it been a Zoroastrian diaspora? The answer is very clear. If you want to learn, for instance, Iranian classical music, that's Gahi music. Do they preserve it in India? Absolutely not. But they do. You can go to Iran and you can learn it in any khanqa or any other place in Iran. You can learn it. Or their language, they fought for it. They were going to be Arabized, just like the Syrians. They fought for it. They held on to the language. Of course, their language is very different now from what it was, but they did a great job of that. There are many things like that about their ancient spirit, their ancient ways of thinking, that they have managed to in some way, covert or overtly, bring into the present with them. And I just want to tell them that as Hindus, we stand with you. We don't want to change who you are. We just want to give you a context in which you can be who you are in the best way possible, in the most universalist way possible, in the most stable way possible. And I think that's a conversation that we should have.
Thank you so much. And Utsav, if you wanted to say something in conclusion, you can do that, and then we can wrap this up.
I just want to conclude by saying that thank you for having this show, Sri, because you will be watching the news very soon, and you will be getting 10 different things about Iran. But I bet there will be nobody out there who will be looking at Iran from this perspective and from 100-year in the future viewpoint. So again, Vedicization of Iran would be the punchline that I would end from my perspective on this would be. And you can carry on, Sri, on this.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Krishna. And a word about your organization, ICHRRF, before we log off.
ICHRRF stands for the International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom. What we do is we speak up for underrepresented communities all across the world, but we have a special focus on indigenous traditions all across the world that are basically united by, even though they are so disparate from different races, different cultures, different language, they share certain things in common. There are three things. One is a universal philosophy. Universalism meaning that it just applies universally as a matter of fact. It's not a totalitarian ideology that this is the way and others are not, but it's a universalist philosophies. Second, they're typified by polycentricity, which means the center is everywhere. It's not rooted in some history-centric individual or some geographical place. And the third is perennialism. That is, they believe that this truth has always been and always will be what we call Sanatana Dharma in Hinduism. That's their indigenous traditions across the world. So that's who we are.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. Very, very wonderful listening to both of you. And viewers, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also share this thing. If you grew up in some of the specific cities in India where you'll see a fair sprinkling of Parsi population, like for example, South Mumbai, or I think Punyanagari or Pune and in Hyderabad. I can't remember. There are other cities, I'm sure, where are also sprinkling. Kolkata has some, Delhi has some. So this is something that's like a reawakening, and let's see how best we can help Iran rediscover itself. Thank you once again. Namaskar.
Namaskar.